You don't talk about it, not in sermons, not in study groups, not even alone in prayer, but it lingers, quiet, weightless, waiting, not the fear of hellfire or judgment. No, those are easy. This fear is deeper, older. It lives in the silence after your last amen, in the way your questions echo, unanswered, in the way your faith feels like glass, polished, displayed, and always one crack from shattering. You were taught that belief was a fortress, but maybe it's a room with no windows, and you're only now noticing the locked door behind you. You've called it doubt, weakness, temptation. But what if it's honesty? What if the deepest parts of you already know something is wrong? These aren't the fears they warn you about. These are the ones they bury. But tonight, we dig them up. 5 fears, yours. Let's begin. Fear number 1, the silence of God. You've spoken to him, haven't you? In the dark, when your thoughts were heavier than your body, when there was no one else to hear. You whispered into the silence, hoping, pleading, believing that someone, something, was listening. At first, the silence felt sacred, like maybe he was waiting, like maybe silence was the answer. But silence stretches. It grows longer, colder, hungrier, and eventually, it stops feeling holy. It starts feeling like absence. You tell yourself it's a test, that God is speaking in ways you can't understand, that this is what Faith Island, but the truth grows louder, not in thunder, but in stillness. What if no one is listening? What if the silence isn't divine? What if it's just silence? You feel the doubt crawling in, not because you're weak, but because you're honest. What if every prayer, every cry, every confession was just you talking to yourself? What if the silence isn't empty because God is quiet, but because he isn't there at all? That fear is quiet, but it's deeper than hell. Because punishment means someone is watching. But silence? Silence means you're alone. Fear number 2, the fragility of faith. You were told faith is strength, a rock, a shield, something unbreakable. But you felt it, that tremble beneath the surface, that single thought you weren't supposed to think. What if none of it is real? It doesn't scream. It whispers. A quiet doubt tucked beneath the hymns. Just one thread, and everything begins to unravel. You try to hold it together, repeat the verses, avoid the questions, smile during the sermons. But faith, real faith, shouldn't need to hide, shouldn't collapse under its own weight. And yet, yours feels brittle. Because the truth is, belief isn't a fortress. It's glass, beautiful, but breakable. It's why questions feel dangerous, why curiosity is labeled sin, why the wrong book, the wrong friend, the wrong moment can undo years of certainty. You're scared of that moment, not because you're evil, but because you've built your identity on a foundation that can crack. And if it breaks, what's left of you? It's not just the fear of being wrong. It's the fear of no longer belonging, the fear of being free and alone. Because if faith falls apart, so does the story of who you are. Fear number 3, hell might be a lie, and so might heaven. They warned you about hell, showed you fire, spoke of endless torment, told you to obey, so you'd be spared. But what if hell isn't real? What if it never was? What if it's a story, a control device, a way to keep you afraid, a way to keep you small? You try not to ask, you push the thought away, but late at night, it returns. Because if hell isn't real, then neither is heaven. And if neither exists, then death is just death. No reward, no reunion, no eternal comfort, just the lights going out. That thought terrifies you, not just because of what it means, but because of how much of your life is built around avoiding hell and chasing heaven. You've made choices, moral, personal, intimate, based on afterlife consequences. And if that promise is a lie, then what was it all for? What does it mean to be good without a prize? What does it mean to die without a continuation? You fear the fire, yes, but more than that, you fear the void, the nothing. And worst of all, you fear you were never told the truth. just handed a myth to keep you in line. Fear number 4. Being watched and still being unknown. You were taught that God sees everything, every thought, every action, even the ones you hide from yourself. You were told this was love, that to be fully known was to be fully embraced. But what if it doesn't feel like love? What if it feels like surveillance? You start to wonder, if he sees everything, why do you still feel invisible? You cry out in pain, and nothing changes. You beg for help, and the silence stays. You're told he knows you, but does he understand you? Because the God they gave you, he loves obedience. He loves worship. He loves control. But does he love you as you are? Or only as you pretend to be? You begin to split, the believer and the hidden self, the one with questions, with anger, with desire. And suddenly, being watched feels less like intimacy and more like exposure. You're terrified that even under divine gaze, you are still unknown, unseen, unloved. And worse, that your whole life has been lived for a watcher who only values your silence. Fear number 5, wasted life. This is the one you bury deepest, the one you don't even whisper, because it doesn't just question your beliefs, it questions your life. What if you were wrong? Not just about God, but about everything that came with him. The prayers, the sacrifices, the guilt, the time. What if the years you spent denying yourself, your mind, your body, your questions, were spent chasing a shadow? What if you devoted your entire life to a script someone else wrote? A script that ends with no applause. You imagine the years slipping through your fingers, moments you could have lived freely, truths you could have explored, people you could have loved. But instead, you followed rules written by men, rules that told you who to be and who not to become. You called it purpose. You called it salvation. But now, in the quiet, you wonder, was it just fear? You fear that waking up now means starting over, that the cost of truth is everything you've built. You fear the question, what if the life you lived for God was a life half-lived? And what if the only hell is realizing that too late? These fears don't announce themselves. They live quietly, behind devotion, beneath doctrine, inside the pause between rituals. You carry them like smuggled doubt, wrapped in reverence, hidden even from yourself. But they're there. You've felt them. And the truth is, you're not alone. Because somewhere, out there in the world beyond your church walls, those same fears are waking up in others. The questions you bury, they're rising in people you'll never meet, in classrooms, in bedrooms, in hospital waiting rooms, in late-night scrolls, through forbidden ideas. And slowly, the soil that once held these fears in place begins to shift. Faith, once unshakable, starts to erode, not from hatred, but from honest reflection. Because this isn't just your internal unraveling, it's part of something larger, something cultural, something irreversible. This is where belief meets the modern world. This is where we go next. Modern erosion. You were raised in a world where questions had answers, where every unknown had a verse, where mystery was allowed so long as it bowed to doctrine. But the world changed, not suddenly, gradually, like light bleeding under a door you were told never to open. Science didn't scream at your faith, it whispered. It showed you galaxies older than your creation myths. It mapped the brain you were told housed the soul. It revealed how morality can evolve, without gods, without hell. Therapy spoke where prayer stayed silent. Philosophy asked questions your preacher wouldn't touch. And doubt, once your enemy, began to feel like freedom. You began to notice the fear behind certainty, how faith demanded repetition, not reflection, how the truth seemed allergic to scrutiny, how the sacred often collapsed under a microscope. And you realized, religion isn't dying because of rebellion, it's eroding from within, from the quiet awakening of people like you, people who still want meaning, but no longer want control, who want wonder, but not surveillance, connection, but not condemnation. And suddenly, belief feels small, not because you've become arrogant, but because you've grown. You step outside the sanctuary, and the sky doesn't fall, Lightning doesn't strike. The silence is still there, but it no longer terrifies you. Because for the first time, you're not trying to fill it. You're listening to it. And that silence, the one they taught you to fear, might just be your beginning. Haunting reflection. So now you stand here, on the other side of belief, or maybe just on the edge, looking back at the system that raised you, shaped you, and warned you never to leave. And yet, you left. If not with your feet, then with your thoughts. You carry the ghosts of your faith, not just in what you believed, but in who you were because you believed. And now, without promises, without heaven, without fear, you're forced to ask, what does goodness mean when no one's keeping score? What does it mean to love, to forgive, to find purpose without eternal rewards? What does morality look like when it's not written in stone, but grown in you? You once feared sin, now you fear wasted potential. You once feared judgment, now you fear never knowing who you really are outside the walls of religion. And here's the hardest part. You will never get back the years. You will never unknow what it felt like to be watched, to be ashamed, to perform. But maybe, just maybe, you can begin something else. Not certainty, not dogma, but clarity. Not a new religion, but a reclaimed life. Not answers, but better questions. And in that terrifying openness, where no God speaks and no hell chases you, you might finally find something true. Not eternal, but real. You remember the house you were raised in, the spiritual one, built with certainty, sealed with fear, lit by promises. You were told it was safe. That outside was chaos. That doubt was danger. So you stayed. You memorized the stories. You locked the doors behind your questions. But now, you've started turning the handle. Cracks in the stained glass let in a different light, not divine, but real. You step outside, not with bitterness, but with bare feet and open eyes. The world is quieter here. No hymns, no hell, no holy scripts, just wind, breath, and time. You thought truth would feel like thunder, but it feels like a slow exhale. And somewhere inside you, the fears don't vanish, but they soften. Because they're not your enemies. They're your birth pains. This isn't a fall from grace. It's a return to gravity. So now the question is yours. What will you build with the life that's finally yours? No gods watching, no devils chasing, just you, awake.